What's up, Monarchs? Welcome back to another episode of the hashtag Equity is for Everyone podcast. I'm Anele Jones, W&GEC Digital Media and Marketing Coordinator, and today I'm joined by my co-host and a special guest, and I will let them introduce themselves.
My name is Ericka Harrison-Bay. I'm the Assistant Director for the Women's and Gender Equity Center, but I'm also ODU's Confidential Victim Advocate. I am a two-time alum of ODU, and I'm also a survivor of domestic violence.
My name is Neisha Himes. I am a survivor of domestic violence and domestic violence specialist, big community advocate, activist here in Hampton Roads, founder of Neisha Christine Consulting and Grow Foundation.
So, for those of you who don't know who Neisha Himes is, Neisha does a lot, and her name is important in the world of domestic violence, I think, and I feel like it's a resource that everyone should know about. So that's kind of the purpose of this Domestic Violence Awareness Month episode. So because of that, Neisha, do you mind sharing a little bit of what pushed you into that field and pushed you to do what you do in relation to domestic violence?
Sure. Well, first, just thank you so much for having me and having this platform. I think it's important, especially during this month. So just to give a little bit of background about myself, I am originally from New Jersey, been here in Virginia for quite some time at this point. Came from a close-knit family, just grew up in a very healthy household, right? Moved here to Virginia at the time. I had a son and eventually wound up having my daughter. And then after that relationship, wound up getting into another relationship where it was very abusive, very toxic, included various forms of abuse such as emotional, verbal, psychological, financial, physical, sexual, you name it. And after getting out of that relationship, which was about 5.5 years, I decided to start speaking out maybe about a year and a half after getting out. And that was through my gift of spoken word poetry. So essentially, the first time I told my story was on a stage holding a mic. So what happened from there, I think it was just a different way to bring awareness. Survivors started reaching out to me just for some insight on how to get out. They would ask questions like, how did you do it? How did you do it? So I wanted to do more. I eventually started my nonprofit organization, Grow Foundation, which just turned 8 years old in August. I know, stats for that, right? It's no easy feat. And then I also founded Neisha Christine Consulting, which is where I do a lot of the domestic violence prevention initiatives and speak to a lot of businesses, schools, and things like that in the area to try to bring awareness.
So you did mention that, your childhood wasn't necessarily traumatic, right, and it wasn't rough, right, which is a common misconception about domestic violence. But do you think those misconceptions impact people's outside view of domestic violence? Like, oh, well, you're Black and you're poor, so of course you're gonna be in a domestic violence relationship.
That's a great question. I grew up in the suburbs in Jersey, right? 2-parent household, and no family is perfect, but I didn't grow up seeing like what people would consider domestic violence, and when I got into that relationship, I just didn't think it could be domestic violence because it didn't start off as physical abuse. And I think people have an idea of what a victim looks like, whether they just assume it's a woman, when men can be victims of domestic violence as well, whether they assume that you're uneducated or you came from a broken home. I mean, even my ex-partner, the abusive partner, he grew up in a 2-parent household, and from what I understand, it wasn't abusive either. So I just think that domestic violence doesn't fit in this neat little box that a lot of people think it does.
And Ericka, you did share when you introduced yourself that you also are a survivor of domestic violence. So did you want to share a little bit of your experience with that?
Yeah, so I actually am a product of growing up in the environment where that was happening in my household. And, I talked about this last night, how you unfortunately grow up thinking things are normal. Like, even if you have a sense in your gut that like this doesn't feel good, especially as a child, you don't know anything different, and you internalize those problems. And so you think like this is just what you have to do in order to either receive love or not be hurt. So for me, my mother and myself were both victims of abuse in our home, separately of each other. We also only very recently started to really share each other's experiences. So that was something that was healing for both of us. But the thing that was wild is I remember saying to myself, I'll never be a victim outside of my home because I know what it looks like. I know what to avoid. And I did not know that it could happen in same gender relationships. So when I was in college, my abuser was a woman. And I remember thinking, this is so surreal, because I was like, I started college while I was still in high school. I traveled to all these countries. I was this like, writer that people looked up to. And I'm only 19 at the time, but I felt accomplished. And then to know that I was living in the home with my mom, and my partner was again a woman, and I was experiencing physical, verbal, psychological, financial, all the things that Neisha named, was very eye-opening. And I think what was more eye-opening was how law enforcement responds to same-gender relationships that have intimate partner violence, because I did have to call the police at one time. And when they arrived, they said that we were fighting like sisters. They did not take a report, and they left. And mind you, what precipitated that phone call was a pretty graphic assault on me, and they did nothing. So that's when I had my moment of, oh, I'm going to be vocal about my experience, because I know that someone such as myself, who again had, education, my parents finally divorced when I was a teenager, but my mom was always present and very active and supportive. And then also I had been out in the community since I was a teenager. I knew there had to be other people like myself who had misconceptions, but also maybe had similar stories and needed some support or someone to kind of help bring that to light. So that's where my journey in that realm started.
So do you guys agree with the fact that not essentially that mental health starts and with abuse, but that the experiences that one go through, or even the challenges that they go through after trying to grow and find themselves while moving on from it, can affect their mental health?
Absolutely, because there's this misconception that once you go through domestic violence or any trauma, that by a certain date you're healed. It's like, oh, snap, today is Friday, October 18th. I'm about to be healed in like 20 minutes. Like, that's not how it happens, right? Healing is an everyday journey. It's up and down. And domestic violence, it literally changes who you are as a person. Trauma literally rewires your brain and how you think and how you receive and process information. So those who go through something like domestic violence, sexual assault, or any of those related traumas, you struggle with depression, anxiety, you struggle with PTSD, you struggle with all of these different things. And when you're not sure how to navigate it, you don't even recognize what it is that you're going through. You literally feel like you're losing your mind, you really feel like you don't know who to trust. And I think one of the biggest things I had to realize was I didn't even at some point trust myself anymore to form relationships, whether it was friendships, whether it was intimate partners. It was just a thing where I was always on guard all the time. So it definitely impacts your mental health.
Yeah. Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think Neisha just very much illustrated how it impacts one's health, but I also want to say that we should be mindful too, to make a note that mental health is not an excuse to cause harm. So we know that a lot of people who perpetrate abuse have histories of abuse or mental health issues, right? Like, we throw this around a lot, but people who may have narcissistic traits or the actual personality type usually have deep-seated traumas from their childhood that causes them to create the fantasy world they're operating in, right? But it's still no excuse for them to perpetrate harm. So people who have mental health issues are often more likely to be victimized and experience abuse, but also hurting people is not a justification. So I just want to, on the counterpoint to how it can create mental health conditions that may not have existed prior to the abuse, it does not then give people license or permission to,
That's a great point.
It's like you cut yourself and bleed on someone else,
And I will say, like, as a student and being surrounded by friends who are experiencing those things as well, and they're like, oh, well, like you said, like, hurt people, that's not the case. When you see hurt in your life, when you see negative relationships, especially as a child, you're like, I don't, like you said before, like I can't be domestically abused because I've experienced that and I know what it looks like and I'm going to stay away from that. But that's not the case. And I feel like, especially as being only 19 years old and being surrounded with other young people, and we're all kind of taking that moment to grow and still learn who we are as individuals, we do get kind of stuck in those relationships where we're like, oh, well, you know, they're still learning, they're still growing too. And then but there's no change with that. There is no growth because they're just kind of staying in that same state. Right. And I feel like that's very important for college students to hear. Yeah. Especially because you guys' stories are very specific to not only women, but women of color, women who have experienced things outside of domestic violence, you know, other forms of trauma. And it may help people feel a little bit less alone in what they're experiencing. But kind of tying into community again, social media. It's always like one of those big topics when you talk about like mental health, trauma, anything like that. And I think it's because it's such a huge part of society today. And people base almost everything that they do off of what they're seeing on social media. And not to shout out specific networks, but Zeus Network on TV.
Wait, what's that? I'm old. Wait, what's
Zeus,
that?
So do you know
Look, what camera do I look at to say I'm old? Wait, I'm old, y'all. Like, what is Zeus Network? What are we talking about? So
do you know what Baddies is? Have you heard of Baddies?
Remember Bad Girls Club. That's
okay.
Do you know Natalie Nunn?
No.
Okay, well, Bad Girls Club. Natalie Nunn was on Bad Girls Club.
Okay.
She started this show called Baddies on Zeus Network.
Okay.
And in Baddies, there's this girl named Krishan Rock.
Oh, I know Krishan. Okay,
Krishan
and Blueface, right?
And Blueface.
Okay. Yeah, that's
all that craziness. Yeah, she was on like 3 seasons. All that craziness that her and Blueface get into, they end up making a show about it. Yeah. And the whole first season of the show, it's like them beating each other up. Yeah. And I'm like, you know, it's like literally promoting domestic violence. You're like, oh, look at what they're doing. Like they're so in love that they're going to hurt each other, you know? So would you agree that, you know, especially because Zeus has a lot of young viewers, which is crazy. But would you agree that digital media plays a part in both shaping those perceptions of domestic violence and promoting unhealthy relationships?
I'm like, we're absolutely. Yes, because it's like toxicity is embraced. I think we've learned something I always say is to function in dysfunction. And healthy is the abnormal thing, right? You see people fighting on social media, you see it in the movies, you see it on TV, you hear it in the music, and you think that's normal, especially with our like young adults. I talk to a lot of kids in like high school and young adults in college, and it's like, oh, I didn't think my partner loved me unless they hit me, or unless they called me out my name, or unless they controlled my finances or my social media or wanted to know my passwords and things like that. And an example I always give, there was a young lady named Toni Wells. She was 22 years old, and she went viral because her boyfriend at the time had tattooed like her whole image on his back. And it went viral, and it was like relationship goals. So it was girls on social media like, oh, this is what I want. If my man ain't doing this for me, do I even want it? You know what I'm saying? And it just was like everywhere. And then when he took her life, when it came out that she was in this horrifically abusive relationship and she ultimately lost her life to domestic violence, everybody was shocked. Like, well, I thought he loved her. But, you know, even looking at something like that is controlling. It's love bombing. It's all of these different things. And it's showing that like almost like she's his property. And social media definitely shapes and plays a role in what we view as accepted in relationships, what healthy is supposed to look like, what love is supposed to look like, what desire and I want you looks like, when really it's toxic.
Yeah.
And I think, so I did a video yesterday, just like a short video about DVAM. And one of the questions was like, do you think jealousy is a sign of control or love? Right. And a lot of people were saying control, but there was one person who was like, love, because if I'm obsessed with you, that means I'm in love with you. And obsessiveness is a sign of control. It's a sign of
manipulation and
like toxicity. Yeah. So there's like levels to it.
Yeah. I want to add, again, like a little bit of a counterpoint that social media can also be very helpful though, because people not only can see what toxic
Right.
relationships look like, but they can find community and resources, right? So like how my platform got started was by specifically talking about what people who experience parental abuse, that's how it initially started. But then it spread out into relationship violence and, you know, the ways that people use language to victim blame.
Right.
But more so how people can heal. And so we talked about healing not being linear, but also when you take it into your own control and feel empowered to begin your healing journey, when you start to find more people who are doing the same work, it feels more attainable and accessible. And, you know, abuse really thrives in darkness and isolation, when people feel shamed. And so when you are open and transparent about stories such as mine and Neisha's, people who listen to that can start to feel like they can come out of that darkness as well. So even though we do see on one end of the spectrum a lot of normalization of very unhealthy relationship habits, you have just as many voices dominating, if not sometimes more, that like that's not what love looks like, right? Like websites like loveisrespect.org is one that, you know, it's not a social media site, but it's a website. And that does a really good job, especially for like college age people to kind of learn that, yeah, your partner asking for your password on your phone is not inherently abusive.
Right.
But look at the bigger picture. Does it feel uncomfortable for you to share that information?
Yeah, like what's the reasoning?
What's the reasoning? What's the context?
Like,
is it a pattern, right? You know, they go out and get your name tatted. Okay, did you feel that was a gesture of love, or does it feel like love bombing? Which, can we define that real quick? Because a lot of people don't know what that is. I usually say if it feels too good to be true, it might be. But also, if it feels smothering or overwhelming, then that's probably love bombing. So a quick example, like if you are at work and maybe you tell your partner like, hey babe, I don't want you coming to my job, it's a very, you know, confidential space, or like there's just a boundary that I have, right? Don't come to my job. But then you go to work one day and your office is covered with bouquets of floral arrangements and, you know, all these grand gestures are in the space. A person who does not have concerns about the partner's behavior may see that and be like, wow, this is amazing, right? But if you've communicated to them, I asked you not to come to my job. How did you get in here, right? Why did you do this? That's because it feels overwhelming and smothering. And so on its own, the decoration is not problematic. But when you, again, look at context and think about what you've verbally expressed or what you've communicated as a boundary, and the person keeps doing these grand gestures too much, too soon, too intense, it's more than likely love bombing, which is a manipulation tactic that people may use when they're trying to get a lot of power and control over you, not just in the beginning of the relationship, but throughout the duration of it, to reel you back in if they feel like they're losing that control.
So Eric, you shared with us kind of in the beginning of what you said, like what got you into just starting an open conversation about domestic violence and sharing and spreading the education and awareness for it. And Neisha did mention like using your spoken word poetry and stuff. So were there specific pushes for you guys that were like, you know what, now is the time and I need to do this and get it out there because I've taken the time to heal and now it's time for everyone to know. And it's time to let other people know what they can do to get here.
I would say for me, when I first started speaking out, I just needed to get it off my chest. I didn't even know that it was going to help other people. I was just tired of feeling like holding it all in. So spoken word and writing has always been very therapeutic for me. And what started happening was people started asking me to speak at schools and conferences and shelters and things like that. And I think it was just a different way to hear it. And then when I realized like that it was helping people, that almost became like a responsibility to me, a duty to me to speak up, because when I was going through that situation, I used to ask God, like, why me, why me, why me? And now I feel like even though I didn't deserve what I went through, I was meant to go through it, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here today, right? And I've met so many amazing people like Ericka and sitting here with you and being able to do this work and being active on social media and things like that, because I didn't know. At the time, like it didn't look like what I thought it looked like. So now it's like I'm going to tell everybody. And something I always say on social media or in person is like, I will not shut up. You know, like, I will not shut up. And that's something my ex used to always say, like, shut up. Nobody cares what you're crying about. Nobody cares that you hurt, you're bleeding, whatever. Like, shut up, shut up, shut up. So now I'm just like, I will not shut up. So I refuse to be quiet at this point. I'll talk to someone in the grocery store. I don't care. It happens. At the gym, it will happen. So it's just, to me, an obligation to do it, and I'm just going to keep talking.
So for both of you guys are both in positions where you have networks and organizations to help support people in those situations, but speaking in terms of people who are kind of scared to take that step, to get the help that they need, what message would you like to share with them if they are struggling with domestic violence or just their mental health even?
Yeah, but before I answer that, I did want to go back to the other question, because like for me, it's very much like it was a huge moment in my life. So when I finished my first degree at ODU, I had the opportunity to go to South Africa for a month with the Women and Gender Studies department. And prior to that, I had gone like mostly no contact-ish with my parent. And I decided to invite them to my graduation because I knew if I didn't, it would be an issue. Let's just say that, right? So invited him, he came. And while we're sitting down having like graduation dinner, he's like, okay, so like what's next, right? So I said, well, with my degree, I've always wanted to give back to the spaces that helped my mother and I basically get to where we are now. So I said, I think I want to go into working with, survivors and victims of domestic violence. And am I allowed to cuss?
It's your network.
Look, I've been holding back for so. I was like, am I supposed to be? I've been editing myself in my mind this whole time.
Okay. Well, so this will be it's like a PG-13 movie, right? You're allowed like 2 S words and 1 F bomb. So my 1 S word.
Is that each of us, or just the whole?
Usually in the whole.
Like, okay, all right.
Well, so I said that I wanted to do this for work, and my father was like, well, why would you want to do some depressing shit like that? And I just looked at him. And I said, I wonder why, right? And like, that was one of the first times, I'm like 25 years old. That's probably one of the first times I ever like challenged him. But that was a moment where I was like, yeah, this is the right idea. Yeah. Then I went to South Africa. And while I was there, we went to the Sarja Bartman Women's and Children's facility. So it was basically their domestic violence shelter. And while I was there, I was talking to some of the residents and, people who worked there and telling them about my passions and interests. And all the other women on the trip with me were already in their master's program. And this was one of their elective programs, the trip, right? I was just there because I was invited by the chair of the department because of my passions and interests. And it was being in that space that I realized I need to come back home and do this, because the people that I was talking to there were like, you want a job? I know you from America, but like, we need you, right? Like, you want to work? I was like, oh, I would love to relocate to South Africa, right? But realistically, I was like, I need to be doing this in my community, because that was a resource that my mom and I had. And I already knew, like I said, from the first graduation that I wanted to go that route. But I knew when I came back to the States, I needed to enroll in my master's so I could get my degree, so I could do the counseling and get into that space. And so that was my insightful moment.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I tell people all the time, like, well, this, isn't what I want to do professionally, but I'm very grateful to be in the office that I am in, because I tell people all the time, I walk in and every day's like a therapy session, but not like unwantingly, it's kind of like a healing journey. And I feel like I've learned a lot, and I am very lucky to have the supervisors that I have. I thank Ericka and Bree every day for teaching me and making me so knowledgeable about these things, because I feel like with that, again, as a 19-year-old college student, like, I'm the youngest in my friend group, but all my friends are like coming to me. They're like, hey, I don't know how to feel about this situation. I need someone to talk to. I'm like, okay, well, I got someone. Like, go see Ericka, And I think it's important for everyone to kind of have that space. And
no, I was like, I do remember the question you asked us, so I didn't know if you wanted us to
go back to that. And with having that space, I feel like everything is kind of shared internally, but I do want to make sure that like students get to hear it too.
Right.
Like I hear messages from Bree and Ericka every day. Like, you need to give yourself space to grow. You need to give yourself room and make sure that you are safe within yourself. And with that, like, is there anything that you guys would like to share with anyone who is struggling and doesn't really know, or is kind of scared of taking the step to get those resources?
Yeah, you can start that one.
Oh, that's always, every time I'm asked that, I'm just like, because you want to make sure you say the thing
With
that right, and you want to make sure you're saying it to who really needs to hear it in this moment. So I would just say that, what you're experiencing, what you're going through is not the end of your story. It doesn't have to be your story. And I know that it's difficult. I know that it hurts, and I know that it's a day-to-day journey, and I know that you love the person, because I think there's a misconception that domestic violence relationships are always bad, and it's not. And not to be misconstrued, that because one time I said that, somebody's like, so all abuse is bad? No, abuse is bad. What I'm saying is that there are moments where there's no abuse. Mm-hmm. There's the inside jokes, there's the laughter, there's the cuddling, there's the fun times, and all of these things. So oftentimes it's not that people want the relationships to end, they want the abuse to end, and there's a difference. Mm-hmm. And people hold on because they're holding on to the hope that the things will change. Mm-hmm. But I ask whoever this may resonate with, you can give yourself the reasons, why you should stay. Perhaps there's financial dependence. Perhaps there's children in common. Perhaps there's just that trauma bond, that love there. I just ask you to ask yourself why you deserve to stay, because there's a difference there as well. And just to know that there is help, that you don't have to go through what you're going through alone, that just to talk to someone that you trust, whether it's a friend, a family member, Ericka, me, I don't know, like anyone, you know what I mean? And just know that there is a way out, and there is life after. If that's the biggest takeaway, there is life after. I never thought I would be sitting here doing what I'm doing in this space, but more than that, just loving myself and knowing my worth. And I am, and I believe that the same could be true for you too.
I mean, Neisha said so much of that beautifully, and I don't want to sound redundant. I think what I would mostly add is that, like, there's nothing that you did wrong.
Exactly.
People who choose to abuse others, number one, it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
We always have choices, no matter the circumstances or how difficult our lives have been. We always have a choice. And in that, it's also important to remember that they also know how to pick the people that they choose to victimize. So there's nothing that you did in particular to deserve the treatment. It's just, unfortunately, there are types of people in the world who choose to use their power not for good, right? Mm-hmm. And so adding to that, Neisha mentioned, like, there is help, right? I always want people to know that there is help out there. The hardest part is asking for help and seeking help, because, again, abuse thrives in shame and silence. But when you are courageous enough and feel empowered to reach out, there will be a hand there to catch you. And I think that going from there, it's really important to know that you have to give yourself grace. It's going to take time. We know that one of the most dangerous times, depending on what's going on in the relationship, the most dangerous time for a victim is when they leave.
Exactly.
Over 75% of violence escalates at the time a partner chooses to truly end the relationship, which also can take 8 to 12 times. So I'm sharing some numbers and things because I also want to normalize that a lot of people struggle with ending toxic and abusive relationships. So, if you're not ready today, that's okay, right? Just know what the resources are, have support people, develop a safety plan with someone you trust. If you're in a domestic situation, creating an exit plan with someone that you trust. These are all things that you can just do to arm yourself, and having that knowledge so that when you are ready, or when you are safe enough to do whatever that transition looks like, you already have what you need. And I think just for the purpose of college students, it's like, there's going to be mistakes that we make in life as we grow. And you all are coming into establishing independence sometimes for the first time in your lives. Like you said at the beginning, Anele, y'all are just kind of asserting your own identities. And not every unhealthy relationship is a abusive one, right? So that's the other thing, is like using resources like myself or loveisrespect.org or anyone else that you can talk to, just to get a sense of like, does this sound normal? Your relationship looks good to me. Like what makes it work, right? Like just kind of figuring out if the situation you're in is even one that meets that kind of criteria. And then giving yourself the grace again to like get yourself out of it. And again, like Neisha said so much of the other parts beautifully, so I'm just going to let that kind of marinate.
But then you said some beautiful parts. And now, can I add one more thing?
Yeah,
like everything Ericka said, but also to know that you cannot change an abusive partner. It is not your job to do it. The same way it is a choice for them to make that decision to abuse. You know, it is not your responsibility to change them. They have to make the conscious effort. They have to recognize that they have a problem and then make the conscious effort to change. And for those who are abusive or believe you have tendencies to treat your partner in a way that isn't healthy, there is help for you out there as well. A lot of people don't know that you can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline as someone who is perpetuating the abuse to seek resources also.
Yeah. And I want to add
one
more thing to that, because it's just like got the riffing happening. I think too, please don't lose it.
Bring it back.
Okay, you were talking about, just thinking about kind of like the accountability piece, right? It's really difficult to hold other people accountable, but at the same time, we can shift things in the spaces and spheres that we have control. So like, for people who are listening who maybe have friends who they know do some things that are not healthy, because while this knows no gender, it is a gendered phenomena. And I just want to say in particular, like, guys need to be able to have the psychological safety in their friend groups and in themselves to call out their homeboy. And as a culture, I think we also need to make spaces where we allow little boys and men to have healthy emotional expression and outlets, because I said this last night, we can't have it both ways. We can't say, looking at it from, let's just say like a heterosexual relationship, right? We can't say that it's weak for our men to cry, but then also be frustrated that they don't open up or talk about their feelings, or that the only ones they express are the socially acceptable ones, like anger. We have to make sure that we're creating and cultivating spaces where everyone is able to process their emotions, recognize their emotions, and express them in ways that are healthy, because that's how we make sure our communities are safer, our families are safer. Something I see a lot, and I think this is where I was trying to go back to about the comment Neisha made last, and then I'll wrap that up, but it's basically like, we unfortunately live in a society that reinforces people who are abusive, and we're all capable of engaging in that behavior.
Yes.
Because anytime you have power over someone and you use your power to harm them, that's abusive, right? So like, Anele is my staff, right? If I were to be like, Anele, I know you're supposed to get off at 4 today, but I need you to stay until 5 because I said so.
Right.
I have power over you. So if you say, okay, Ericka, like, yes, right? If that's a pattern, I'm being abusive towards you in the workplace, right? But then if you go and you talk to, I don't know, a first year student who doesn't have a job, they fresh out of high school, and you're like, oh, I need you to do my homework, right?
Right.
That's you then being abusive to them, because you have power over them.
Right.
You're older, you're more experienced, you have a position working on campus, right? So just remembering that, like, there is no archetype to who is an abuse victim, and there's also no archetype to who exactly is perpetrating abuse or violence, because we're all capable. So it's just doing that inner work and recognizing, like, how is my behavior? How do I attract the people I want to be with? But also, how do I be the person that, it
that
basically
they deserve too, like a good person, right? Right.
So for listeners who maybe are ready to seek help or want to know what resources that you guys can provide, or even those who want to kind of get engaged with the line of work that you guys do, what is the best way for them to connect with you or learn more about what you do and your advocacy efforts.
So you want my info, or you want the other resources too, like resources that I think they should reach out to?
Share. Yeah.
Well, I always give out the National DV Hotline just because it's a staple. That's the hotline.org, and that number is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. There's also domesticshelters.org, which is a great resource. It's the largest digital database of resources across the country. So you just put in a city, state, zip, and it'll pull up resources in your area. I also really like the website www.womenslaw.org, which doesn't just help women. It helps because abuse, again, isn't just where the woman is the victim and the male is the perpetrator. In Women's Law, their tagline is they provide plain language legal information for victims of domestic violence. So you might want to know, how do I get a protective order in my city? What does stalking look like? What does this look like? So that's a great resource. But as far as me, because I just gave like 8. NeishaChristine.com. That's Neisha Christine.com. That has all of my social media information as well, how to get in contact. And then as far as my nonprofit, growfoundationva.org.
Yes. So I am right here on ODU's campus, right? Monarch Hall. I'm there Monday through Friday. I do walk-ins and appointments for victim advocacy, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. except noon because girlies got to eat. So, but the best way to contact me is 757-683-4111. Like, what's the 411 with an extra one?
Okay, Mary J.
Okay, that might be lost on some people listening.
They're like, who's Mary J. Blige? But okay.
It's easier for me to say it that way.
You don't know who Mary J. Blige is. Like, we're waiting.
Exactly.
Actually, I think she is just now getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Look at that.
So that's like kind of another timely little thing. But and then my email address is eharriso, like Harrison without the N, at odu.edu. I always hesitate to share my socials just because, it's a little bit of a
fine line.
Yeah, it's a fine
line.
I share mine too? But a lot of people kind of inadvertently find me. So if you find me, I have plausible deniability. I truly don't mind people finding it. I just don't very much share it publicly on campus just because of the work I do. But I also just want to make sure I mention some of our partners that we often work with. So the Y.W.C.A. of Southampton Roads, they serve all 7 cities. They have a 24/7 crisis response hotline. That number is 757-251-0144. And then we have Samaritan House for Virginia Beach. There's some places out in Suffolk, Geneve Counseling Shelter. I used to have an office at all 3 of those locations in 1 week. So anyway, so I mean, I think I'll just leave it with the fact that if anyone wants more, they can come to me, and I'm happy to share those things with them, and including their rights and other things to get them support.
Well, I would like to thank you so much, Neisha, for coming and sharing this.
Thank you for having me.
This is a great conversation to have, and not a lot of people are having it. And I think it's very important to highlight it, especially this is going to go on social media. So there's no reason that people could say, "Oh, well, I didn't see it on that." You can access it. You can access it.
I know
YouTube, Instagram, Spotify. You can even put it in your ears while you're walking to class.
Do y'all still do TikTok? I got a TikTok too. I do it just for.
You can't do TikTok.
I'm gonna post clips if I can.
You can. Okay. So just institutionally, we're not allowed to have an account.
I got you.
But things can get posted on there. Just
follow me at Neisha's Voice.
it don't add up.
At Neisha's Voice, yes.
No, we cannot have TikTok. We love Instagram Reels, but
okay, I got you. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I got you.
But thank you guys so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for everyone who listened and watched. That will be it for this episode. You can check us out on Instagram, audio_WGEC. And also, if you're watching this on Spotify, check out our YouTube, audio_WGEC. See you next time.
I know, wave it